Tatiana from the former Soviet Union, probably from the Russian part. She was the first woman to clean and jerk 400 pounds, and she has immaculate form. Because I remember Kurt Kowalski when he retired, he was a famous powerlifter, and they
Hmm.
asked him, "Hey, now that you retired, anything you want to delve, anything you want to hand out that maybe you would not have offered up when you were competing?" And he's like, when I was stuck and I knew it was a technique issue, I would go watch women compete because women have to have better technique than men do. Men can kind of bowl through it. And so I watch a lot of women's weightlifting because they have to do things so precisely, so perfectly. Um, they can't get away with the same stuff that the men can get away with. So I spend a lot of time watching women's weightlifting.
I was gonna say, I think that's probably a good tip too, just for a different, uh,
Yeah.
different viewpoint that a lot of lifters nowadays, whatever they're lifting in, don't think of.
Mm.
And I think that sometimes we tend to look to like the top. Like if we're male competitors, we're looking at like the male division and who's the strongest, and it's like
Sure.
kind of like any like superior athlete or the elite of the elite. It's almost like, well, what works for that guy might not be your same answer. So you might be kind of looking in
Yeah.
the wrong places. Like I don't know if you play basketball and you go to Michael Jordan and try to study what he's doing, it might not be the
Yeah.
best thing to help you out, because you're not that guy or
Yes.
whatever. So I,
Well,
I think that is a
well,
good outside perspective of
there are there are those I look to for inspiration, and then
yeah.
there are those that I look to for information.
Mhm.
So there's a difference, especially with weightlifting, the sport of weightlifting, because a lot of those athletes have been groomed from a very young age. So you're talking about the genetic elite. And so a lot of the weightlifting programs I see today, whether you realize it or not, they're trickle down from these top levels and they've been modified a little bit to work at a more local level. But it's still kind of based on people though that don't need as much accessory work, that don't
Yeah.
need as much help getting to where they're going. So you've got to know how to read between the lines and realize I might need more accessory work than what this program calls for. You have to use your head. So I tend to look at old weightlifting programs from the 50s and earlier, back when there were no steroids,
Yeah.
and back when weightlifting was stricter. You weren't allowed to touch the body with the bar on the way up with a snatch or a clean. So there was no contact, and it was much harder. Like today, the super heavyweight snatch record is just under 500 pounds. And if that lifter had to do it by old school rules, they would have a hard time even doing 400 pounds.
Yeah.
So steroids definitely help people lift more. But when you're talking competitive powerlifting and competitive weightlifting, rule changes are the biggest reason why they're lifting more so than steroids. If you
Okay.
make it easier to get a weight past, to get a lift past,
Hmm.
powerlifting used to be a flat back, no arch, no leg drive, 2-second pause at the chest on the bench. Not many 600-pound benches are going to happen that way. You know,
No.
not many 500-pound benches are going to happen that way. So, of course, lifters today are working hard, but they're working with a much more favorable set of rules.
Yeah. Now you kind of mentioned powerlifting there. If I just kind of go down the line of some of these strength sports, do you have any? And this could be like you said, this could be a inspiration or information type deal that you look to,
Right.
but pretty much the same question from the Olympic weightlifting to now powerlifting. Do you have a certain power lifter? It could be a lifter, former coach, anything that
Yeah.
maybe you
Yeah.
draw certain, maybe there's a certain person that you maybe have drawn more information from, or like you said, it's inspiration or information, one of the two. But in
Yeah.
powerlifting, who would be kind of some of your top people or some of your favorites there?
Uh, Today, it's fun to watch Dan Bell because he's
Hmm.
lifting raw and he's putting up stupid numbers,
Yeah.
like ridiculous numbers. And then Ed Cohn, I've been following since the 80s. And what's amazing is people don't realize that before the suits got to where they are now, before the suits
Hmm.
got crazy, Ed was in the 220s most of the time that I recall him. when I got into it, he was already in the 220s, and he's total not only would it win the 220 class, but it usually would win the 242 class. The total would have won the 275 class,
Mm-hmm.
and they didn't have a 308 class, so it was super heavy after that. And he would out total everybody at 220, and it made me realize that a phrase that I came up with for myself is that world records are just someone else's PR. All this time, a lot of athletes are like, oh, that world record, and they take on that world record that it applies to them. And Ed seems like the kind of guy that was like, the world record was just a number that's a guide on my way up. It's like, okay, I'll know I'm doing good when I get past that number, but it didn't. Instead, everyone goes, oh, if I can just beat the world record by a few pounds. Whereas he didn't look at it that way. It seemed like he's like, it's someone else's PR. I'm gonna keep going, and he would go way beyond. Remember, this is a guy that was deadlifting 901 in a full
Mm-hmm.
meet at 220.
Yeah.
How many people are deadlifting 900? Not many. How many of them are doing it under 300 pounds? Not many. At under 250? Not many. Yeah. There is today more than then, but he was definitely inspiration. And then again, I'll go back to Doug Hepburn, because to me, he's the first powerlifter, because
Mm-hmm.
he had a foot that he was born with a club foot that he had surgically repaired in the 1930s. So think about surgery in the 1930s, how good it was compared to today. So he's the first one to really focus on heavy bench pressing and reading. He described the squats he did in his training. Those are power squats. Bar, low down the back, sitting back, putting the focus on the glutes and the lower back to help with his weightlifting. And he did a lot of deadlifts. So this was a good decade before powerlifting became an organized national sport in 1964. So when it's, again, powerlifting information, I go to Doug Hepburn, because he really knew what he was doing. And he had to. He had to make up the difference, because he just didn't have that leg that everyone else had.